Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us. To all those here at the studio audience in Doha and around the world, thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Rold. I'm the CEO and publisher of Diplomatic Courier, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Generation Unmute. Our panel today is titled Back to the Future with a question mark, although I would say maybe not a question mark. Personalized learning after the pandemic. And we have Jonathan Birdwell joining us remotely. He's the Director of Public Policy and Thought Leadership at the Economist Impact. Also on the panel with me today, we have Isabel Howe. She's an impact funder. Elias Felfoul, Director of Policy Development and Partnerships at WISE, and Mehdi Ben Shaban, apologies in advance, Executive Director of Learning Innovation at Qatar Foundation, the Pre-University Education Initiative. Welcome to everyone. Thank you again for being with us. We're going to do a lightning round of questions as we unveil this report with our panelists today. But before we do all of that, I would like to welcome Jonathan, who's going to give us a lightning round of what the report is about since it's launching this very moment here today. Welcome, Jonathan.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Anna, and hello to everyone. It's a great honor to be here and taking part in the conference, and I regret that I can't be there in person. Firstly, just a word about Economist Impact. We are the newly launched in-house think tank of the Economist Group, which publishes the Economist magazine. We combine research and analysis with creative storytelling to help pursue progress on key policy issues. And we've been very pleased to partner with the Qatar Foundation over the past few years, exploring a range of topics from health and precision medicine to new models of higher education. And then the topic, of course, of the report that we're launching today on personalized learning. Next slide. Actually, sorry, I have control of the slides. There we go. So our research question that we set out to answer was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic and the acceleration of technology and education that it has inspired, how has that affected the adoption of personalized learning approaches? Now, personalized learning, as I'm sure we'll discuss, is a concept that can mean many different things to many different people. There's often a connection made between personalized learning and 21st century skills like critical thinking, creativity, and communication. And it's really, I think, best seen as a spectrum of approaches, from more traditional teacher-led approaches where teachers personalize lessons based on student needs to approaches where students have greater agency and classes are more learner-led. So in terms of how we sought to answer that question, our methodology was based on two surveys that we undertook, one with educators and then the other with EdTech executives, both geographically focused in the US and the UK, plus a dozen qualitative interviews with academics and various other experts. And of course, due to time, I'll just present the findings of our research at a very high level. But I do encourage you to download the report from the Qatar Foundation website and encourage you to read the findings in more detail. So what did we find? Well, we found that educators favor personalized learning, and the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely accelerated interest in investment. The pandemic, of course, forced schools to adopt various forms of student-led and internet-based remote learning. Teaching approaches that were previously not possible were now more achievable at scale, and more traditional mechanisms around enforcement and surveillance of students' work were not available to the same extent, and really required, I think, a shift in approach for teachers. And this was reflected in the survey. There was near universal agreement among educators, 99% of those we surveyed, that COVID-19 accelerated their school's adoption of personalized learning, and that approach to education is now more relevant than ever. We also saw 9 in 10 report that this style of education is a priority for their institutions in the years ahead, and that it was very likely that budgets were going to increase. We did find in our survey that educators tended to favor more teacher-led approaches. So 3/4 of educators described their approach to personalized learning as really limited to the use of learning plans tailored to student needs, while only about 1/4 of those surveyed said that instructions were paced according to individual student needs, and even fewer, just 14%, said that learners have a say in what, when, and where they learn. We saw that technology is an enabler, is seen as an enabler of personalized learning, but the technology adopted to date tends to support teachers more than students. Nearly all respondents within the educator survey sample had adopted learning management systems which assist student-teacher interaction, but the strength of those systems is really in making it easier for teachers to do what they already do. Technology that was more consistent with a learner-led approach, such as exploratory learning environments or game-based learning tools, virtual agents, those were much less frequently adopted, according to our survey. But in terms of technology, I think as one expert put it to us, it was really important to recognize that on its own, it cannot disrupt education. It requires a mindset shift as well. And it's important to recognize that there's also some wariness among educators about technology's past promises, sort of undelivered, and a concern about the over-reliance on technology. We also saw that not everyone is universally positive. Parents and students in particular still need some convincing around the value of personalized learning. So according to educators, 87% thought that teachers were very supportive of introducing personalized learning in the classroom, but only a quarter say the same about parents and just 8% say the same about students, although it's worth saying that a majority of both are somewhat supportive of personalized learning. Now, this was mirrored in our expert interviews. We saw that personalized learning represents a major change from what students are used to and the way, of course, that parents themselves were taught in school. And so any successful personalized learning program needs to convince these groups of its value, and direct experience of actual personalized learning is seen to be the most effective way to do that. But I think it also draws attention to the fact that what we found was there was a real lack of data demonstrating the effectiveness of personalized learning approaches. And I think that's an area that we need to focus on going forward. And one way to address this and other concerns was that there needs to be greater collaboration between schools and edtech firms. And this was something felt by both educators and executives in edtech firms. So over 90% of both thought that increased collaboration was necessary to develop effective tools, and 82% of edtech executives felt that the lack of access to research and development in schools was a barrier to innovation. But there are barriers to that greater collaboration, including, for example, of course, the fundamentally commercial nature and interest of edtech companies can complicate that relationship, but also concerns around privacy and cost. So perhaps whether these barriers can be overcome and how is something that we can pick up on in the ensuing conversation. So with that, I say thank you. I encourage you all to please download the report at the Qatar Foundation website, and I pass back to you, Anna, for the discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we will unpack a lot of those findings, all very, very interesting. And I wanted to just first start with a few housekeeping items. You have the ability to ask questions to the panel on your app. So please do so. They'll come directly here to me, and I'll be happy to ask them at the end of the conversation, time permitting. I'd like to go through a couple of rounds of conversation to unpack some of these key findings that Jonathan just reported on. And it's my understanding Jonathan will stay with us the entire duration of the panel, so you can also ask questions to him about the report. So let's begin. Mehdi, I'll start with you. Clearly, the research shows that there is quite a bit of disagreement between parents and stakeholders in education about really what personalized learning does and is, and why do you think that misunderstanding is still going on even after a year where there was this mass adoption of personalized learning?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the report to the Economist Impact. I think it shed light on things that we started seeing at post-pandemic, and having some data to support some of the thinking that we had was really, really helpful. Why is there a misunderstanding of the concept? I think understandably, this is one of those concepts that range between anywhere from incremental change, small changes to what happens in the classroom, to a paradigm shift rethinking what education is and what schools are about. And I think with personalizing learning, people agree that we're trying to move away from a mass delivery of content, from a teacher-led, as Jonathan was saying, teacher-led approach, where the teacher tries to deliver content to a large number of students, to really taking the students for face value and really recognizing that each one of them is different and each one of them will need a different approach to learning. So I think the disagreement is not about the intention, but the disagreement is about how do we do that? How do we do it within current school structures is something that every teacher is asking himself or herself. I think during the pandemic, many teachers' first inclination was to try to adapt what they used to do to the new reality, to the use of technology, which I know we will talk about a little bit longer. But many educators started redefining the role and the contract between the teacher and the student. And I think student-led learning, learner agency, all these concepts that existed before the pandemic became something that many people wanted to explore from a practical point of view. So I guess in terms of adoption, it really matters about what we're talking about. I think we need to define this clearly. If we go to a traditionally structured school and we start floating ideas and concepts that don't fit the practical ways of how students and teachers interact, I think that can be a negative disruption. However, if we open the floor and open the space to redefining some of those preconceived ways of doing things or rigid ways of doing things, I think there are many opportunities for us to leverage the learning that happened across the pandemic and really take it to the next level and focus on learning as opposed to focusing on what the teachers do in the teaching.
And thank you for that. And I think it paints a very clear picture of sort of the landscape of why we're here. I want to double click on that. Maybe I'll ask you, Elias, clearly parents, teachers are conservative about adopting a personalized learning. Why is that exactly? And are there policies that we can start adopting to kind of get there?
I think we have to consider two facts. There's a fact of heavy heritage, historical heritage, and culture at a global stage. Maybe we need to remind ourselves that traditional school systems have been built on the 19th century fundamental whether student could operate effectively in agrarian or industrial economies. We are now in a new era. We are now in an era of the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot continue to deliver this Victorian idea of, and as Mahdi mentioned, the teacher-led pedagogy. I think we are doing a huge disservice to a student population that is basically connected to a new world, to a world of digital economy. Now, the skeptical part comes also from, I think it's still difficult for us to really determine how personalized learning is working. I think there is too many definitions of what is the 21st century skills needed. And I think we could start at defining what are these 21st century skills and how do we measure them to actually align. There are efforts to identify and create and common measures of success to student learning that do not rely on traditional assessment and testing. But these have to be pursued at a wholesale school approach to the way that learning is delivered and arguably required an evolution of the ethos and culture at the school level.
Right. And it's obviously what we learned from the pandemic is that learning happens everywhere. It doesn't just happen in a classroom. And so that maybe that mind shift is already started. And what we're seeing right now is the acceleration of it. I'd like to maybe switch gears and invite you, Isabel, to talk a little bit about a paradox that we saw from findings, and that is that personalized learning has been attributed to helping with inequalities in the classroom, but also at the same time widening that inequality gap with high-performing versus low-performing students. Why do you think that is, or can you unpack that a little bit for us?
So equity is, in my humble opinion, the big promise of personalized learning. It's this ability to answer and address individual learners' needs with individualized supports and learning pathways. So in essence, it's equity. However, as you noted, and as the report does a fantastic job at, the evidence is not there. So far, personalized learning has not led to equity. So why, and really maybe more importantly, what can we do about it? So first, there is a big question about technology access, and we saw this, and we still are living through this during the pandemic. Just to quote a stat from the US where I reside, 3 million children do not have internet at home. That's about 17% of kids. So, and we are speaking about the United States. So there is a big homework gap, effectively, that personalized learning has opened up. Technology in school in the US now is reasonably ubiquitous, but at home it still doesn't. It's not there. The other thing, and you alluded to that, Elias, but in my mind, there is a big problem. There is still a gap between the ideal personalized learning and then the practice in a classroom, where it is really complicated to address individual needs of every learners. And there are lots of efforts, as you noted, that are happening in many parts of the planet, but we are still struggling with addressing how do we address with multi-tier supports all these individualized needs. And then lastly, a very dear topic of mine, I think personalized learning needs to embrace equity and diversity in the classroom a lot more than it has. In the US, I did a lot of work on English language learners, which are deeply underperforming a portion of the student population in the United States. And I try to invest in edtech tools that would serve in a personalized way those learners. And I found a few tools, but there are so few of them. There's a paucity of solutions for English language learners. And I'm just picking on one underserved category here of learners that need specific needs, personalized needs, and where the edtech solutions are not where they could be.
It's very interesting, this conundrum, right? We thought that maybe after when COVID-19 happened, we had all the means to deal with all the issues, and so we ran to technology for help, and instead of using technology as a tool to help, we used it to replace things we weren't doing well already. So just going back to that, this over-reliance on technology, Mehdi, I'll come back to you now. The research finds that 46% of educators are concerned that the pandemic created this over-reliance on technology. What do you think is the relationship between tech and personalized learning? Are they incompatible? Tell me what you think about this statistic.
That's a very interesting question. I think, so if we look at the statistics first, though, we're talking about half of the population thinking that there's something bad about the use of technology. And yet, Jonathan, I think you mentioned 99% of the people think that we are going in the direction of personalizing learning with that technology in mind. And I think we need to differentiate, and your first question was about defining personalizing learning, and until we define it, we don't necessarily know what we're talking about. But if I separate the different aspects of using technology within this concept of personalizing learning, and going back to your point about equity, if the technology that we are using has a purpose, and that purpose is, for instance, differentiation. So just to keep things simple, if a teacher uses technology to give different levels of tasks to different students in his or her classroom, and technology allows that to happen, then I don't see how there's any issue with over-reliance. I think that is the purpose drives the tool. If we're talking about access, if we're talking about large number of people accessing information or accessing education in general, and technology allows that, MOOCs, for example, were invented for that purpose, then over-reliance is not a question. We don't talk about over-reliance. We're really solving a problem, and we're creating the tool that helps us solve the problem. Another way to look at the technology as a tool is producing better outcomes. So students, for example, designing through technology as opposed to having to do it by hand can sometimes leverage the quality of outcomes. So again, who would ask a question about over-reliance if the purpose is clear? When the purpose is not clear, what you end up having is classrooms, whether virtual or face-to-face, and that's the tragedy, is that sometimes even in real buildings and with real people around each other, you will have a room full of individual desks with laptops on by default. And no one knows why we're doing it. Like no one in the classroom, the teacher doesn't, the students don't. And I think that was something that started way before the pandemic. I think the whole idea of a one-to-one laptop, schools raved about this feature of having either a laptop or a tablet in the hands of each child. But the purpose was not there. And somehow over time we lost track of why are we using the laptop for this particular learning experience? Is it the best tool? And then having that, I mean, we were talking about this in the previous session, that negotiation of what is the best way to do what we're supposed to be doing here within the classroom. That when that is lost, then the over-reliance is dangerous. And I think it's not just over-reliance, it's over-reliance. It brings up all sorts of issues of digital literacy, responsible use of the tools, and so on. So I think it's really about why we're using the tool, and that's the case for any tool. Why we're using it, and once we have that why clear to everybody involved, I think we'll move on.
I think that's key, the why instead of the how and the what. Because I think when we talk about technology, we get carried away about the gadgetry part of the equation. And you bring up some very good points there. So you're right. We've been using these tools way before the pandemic, and what the pandemic did with education and with many other industries and sectors is accelerated what was already there, right? So if we weren't doing this right before, what the acceleration of these technologies and acceleration of use of them was, just did something that was being done bad, worse. But Isabel, I'm going to come back to you because there's another issue. There was another surprising finding from the report. It says that less than 35% of educators were concerned with risk to student privacy and misuse of student data. And as Mehdi just mentioned, there was just massive use of personalized technology, personalized education technology tools already happening. It accelerated during the pandemic, but people don't seem to be worried about the data privacy as much. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I think it's a huge concern. And it's a huge concern at two levels. One is that, there has been simply an explosion of tools, edtech tools being used in classrooms. There's this organization in the US called Learn Platform that does a survey of the number of edtech tools being used. And before the pandemic, every school was using 700 tools per month. Post-pandemic, 2 years later, we are now at 1,400, actually a little bit over 1,400. 1,400 edtech tools being used every single month by a school. So this huge amount of, tools and solutions that teachers are exploring the potential for data privacy breach is pretty high across 1,400 different tools, clearly. And then the second level that I'm also very concerned, which is related, is the ability of schools to protect data around, against hacking. If large companies are not able to prevent hacking, I'm really concerned about the ability of schools to really do this effectively. So how can we best support schools in doing so?
And you're right, and that was one of the issues that came out, not just in the education sector, but across the board and all other sectors, is now moving online meant that our risks moved and expanded even further. And I'm very cognizant of the time, so I want to make some time for audience questions, and they're coming, and they're actually really good, so keep them coming. So Elias, I'll go to you. Obviously, collaboration between educators and tech firms and ed tech firms and suppliers of these technologies is crucial. So how can we do it? Because Mehdi mentioned earlier that, or I'm sorry, I think it was Jonathan, and it kind of reverberated in the panel discussion that it's kind of an interesting, bizarre, maybe, collaboration between those who provide services, they're in the not-for-profit arena, and those who,
So there is an explosion of tools. However, there still remains somehow a disjointedness between the educators and the edtech provider. So one set of stakeholders is basically relying on iterative design and to understand what is working in a classroom, while the other requires consistency in order to support the student development and learning. So the truth of the matter is that unless schools choose to take a kind of a trust and leap of faith in these providers and have a more collaborative interaction with them, they will not be able to preemptively procure these technologies and meet the evolving needs of the students and the ecosystem they exist in. I see Mehdi nudging. I think if we had more time, Mehdi will just... Now, back to the question of there is concerns regarding the ethical, data collection. This data collection is a major barrier for edtech provider. We see this in an experience we are doing right now. So we have an accelerator at WISE, and with the founders, we decided to create a test bed within this beautiful ecosystem of schools within Qatar Foundation, and we kind of saw the challenges that, how, first of all, the communication between the founders and the schools, but also at the teacher level, we discover what is not working and what is working. And what we need really is, in order to be innovative, is we need more experimentation. That is a fact. Now, there is a lot of things happening positive. We are working right now, even with EDI, to create this research practitioner type of group where we create this culture of you could be a practitioner, but you could be a researcher at the same time, and that is happening. So I think we see there is needs, there are things happening, sometimes not as fast as we could, but there is a progress.
I want to give Jonathan, I have some great questions from the audience, and I'll read a couple, time permitting. But Jonathan, did you, in this conversation, did you want to add something that struck you in all of this from the research? Or should I leave you for the end?
I think it's, maybe let's go to the audience. The sound's coming in and out a little bit, but I think it has been a very fascinating discussion, but I'm interested to hear what the audience has to say.
Excellent. So I'm ready to go to the audience. There's a question here from an audience member that asks, does the report consider the need to develop students' metacognitive skills to participate effectively in leading their own learning? Who wants to take this on? Jonathan?
I mean, just briefly, just to say, I think absolutely, I think this is a really interesting and quite a big question. At what age do we expect what level of agency from students? And there's sort of a conundrum there in the sense that we believe personal learning to boost 21st century skills, and yet sort of self-direction is itself a skill that's seen as sort of a 21st century skill, and sort of depends on students having that beforehand to be able to I think, really excel with personalized learning. So I think there is a potential tension there. And this question about what we saw was that educators, both at primary level and at secondary level, thought that personalized learning was suitable to each of their age groups. So I think we need a more nuanced, fine-grained understanding of what level of agency we expect at what age.
And that's great, because one of the other questions was, well, what about young children in preschool and primary school who are in front of screens, working on projects? And I saw this with my two small children. Do we know what the long-term impact is in social development? How much is too much? Is that something that the study covered, or is this fodder for new study? Isabel, I feel like you want to take
Yes, so
okay, go ahead.
This is an area that I spent a lot of time on. So in the US, the Academy of Pediatricians, the American Academy of Pediatricians has very, very clear guidelines on quantity of screen time. It's by age group. Effectively, before 18 months, it's supposed to be 0, and then it increases from there. The reality is very different. The practice, and during COVID, has been unprecedented surge of tech tools for little children, but also their parents, which is another topic that's really, really interesting, how usage of parents impacts the little ones. But anyway, for the little ones, a surge in viewing. So to me, with, very practical, then the question is it really about quantity, or should we think more about quality? Because if kids are already there in front of screens, we need to continue advocating on why this is not a good thing, but we also probably need to think about what do they watch in front of those screens, and trying to influence that aspect as well.
So we're 40 seconds away from closing this session. I'm very proud that I actually got a chance to ask the questions from the audience. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to remind everyone where you can actually find and download the report that just came out today. www.qf.org.qa//EIU/PUE. And this report unpacks this discussion from today even further. I want to thank everyone, our panelists, Jonathan, and our audience, and everyone who joined us live. Thank you so much, and look forward to the next session.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.